Wait, so there are two of them?
More importantly, which one is mine?
Neither, chauvinist.
Because of this confusion, the Federation arrests both of the Beths. So, the family goes to save them. And after doing so, Rick reveals that he erased his own memory to forget which Beth is real and which isn't. As well, he saved the memory on a device to be replayed, so that they could find out the answer at a later point. But both Beths and the rest of the family decide that they don't want to know who's real. So Rick then decides to rewatch the memory himself, and it's revealed that during the time I mentioned earlier, where it was unclear to the audience if Beth decided she wanted to be cloned or not, that Beth gave Rick the power to make a decision on if she should get cloned or not, and that he decided to go through with it and clone her. Maybe he did this so he could have a version of his daughter which he can relate to better, at the expense of the sanity of both her and her clone. When Rick realizes that this was the decision which he made, it causes some self-reflection.
Holy I'm a terrible father.
Even though Rick has done many horrible things like this, and seems to not value Beth as much as he should, I mean, he literally has abandoned another version of her and left her in an apocalyptic world, so let's hope maybe he at least has a secret deep bond with Morty, because he's never abandoned this version of Morty. Well, that's actually only the case up until Season 5, Episode 9, titled Forgetting Sarah Morchel, where Rick abandons Morty just to replace him with 2 crows. Yeah, 2 literal birds. And even after seeing the terrible state that Morty ends up in without him, where he ends up losing his own hand, Rick still decides to leave Morty in order to continue his adventures with 2 crows. And Morty is crushed by this. Even in the next episode, which is Season 5, Episode 10, titled Rick Mirai Jack, Rick is still with the crows and comes across Morty, who is now 40 years old. So supposedly Rick has been adventuring with these crows for like 26 years? 40-year-old Morty just wants Rick to come back home, but Rick doesn't want to and only does so once he ends up having a falling out with the crows, which causes him to finally come back to Morty. So yeah, basically it took a breakup with literal birds for him to decide to come back. When Rick does come back, it turns out Morty used an aging serum to emotionally blackmail him, and isn't actually 40 years old. So now that Rick got back together with Morty, only due to the fact that his crows betrayed him, he decides to take Morty to the Citadel in order to de-age him. And while at the Citadel, they end up meeting President Morty for dinner. Then at dinner, President Morty reveals to Rick and Morty that he is actually Evil Morty, the same one I mentioned earlier, and he explains the reason that he's evil is because he wants to take down the central finite curve. This causes Morty, and probably some of you, to wonder what is the central finite curve, and Rick seems disturbed that Evil Morty is aware of what the central finite curve is, and makes the connection that Evil Morty got a full brain scan of him during their encounter with Evil Rick back in Season 1, Episode 10, which is one of the episodes I mentioned earlier. Us as the audience were already aware of Evil Morty doing this, but Rick and Morty weren't up to this point.